Good evening and welcome to the special meeting of the York County School Board. I'd like to call that to order. And of course, due to the snow, our January 9th meeting did not happen. So here we are. And this is our organizational business meeting and our annual elections. So at this point, I'm going to turn to Dr. Shander to lead us into the election of the board chair.
Thank you, Dr. George. Good evening, board members, staff, and community. So at this point in the meeting, I'm going to open up the floor to nominations for board chairman.
I'd like to nominate Barbara Haywood to be our board chair for 2017.
Do we need a second?
No.
Okay.
All right, I need a motion to close nominations.
I move that we close the nomination.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ford, please poll the board.
Yes. A motion was made by Mark Medford to nominate Barbara Haywood as board chair. Dr. George?
Yes.
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
Mrs. Kershke is not here. And Mr. Medford?
Yes.
I know you're happy.
Congratulations, Ms. Haywood.
Thank you. We're going to make a quick change.
Yeah, you can do a quick change.
I'm going to move here. Down here.
Mark?
Mark, you want to move up? Well,
Not yet.
Well, I'm just
a
confident.
lot of moving.
Here, have a seat, Rob.
And I know I am. I'm not Robbie. I guess home is saying, what are we doing, right? Well, thank you all for your vote of confidence. I look forward to this position for this year. Robbie, I can't say enough about your leadership, and I thank you. And I know we normally do this in 2-year increments. And as I will say later, I know you're busy with your business and with family, so I want to say thank you for the first year. And I know you're going to do a comeback. So we'll save that second year for later. I also want to indicate that I know Mr. Richardson is traveling. He's been out of town. This trip has been planned that we couldn't change with the weather. And also Mrs. Kershke is traveling. So we made sure that we knew we had a quorum and we could continue with this meeting, but we've talked to them in the meantime. So now I would love to have a motion. I open up the floor for a motion for someone to serve in vice chair. If I could have,
I'd like to nominate Mr. Medford.
thank you. And we would need to close the motions. There a motion to close nominations on that one name.
We'll move motion.
And second, and if I can second it as chair, I will do so. And I need to say it all in favor of Mr. Medford being chair, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And I know Mrs. Ford probably needs to officially call the board, so I will turn to her for that.
A motion was made by Dr. George and seconded by Mrs. Haywood to appoint Mark Medford as vice chair. Dr. George?
Yes.
Mrs. Kershke is absent. Mr. Medford?
Yes.
And Mrs. Haywood?
Yes. Congratulations,
Here.
Mr. Medford.
We're gonna
Do this again. All right.
Stay put here. And I'm going to ask Dr. Shander to come forward with some comments.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood. Congratulations, Ms. Haywood. Congratulations, Mr. Medford. Dr. George,
Yes, sir.
wanted to pass this on to you in recognition of your dedicated service as school board chairman. I'm not sure if we can get up toward work sessions, but I'm going to break that protocol. Wanted to thank you for your dedication, your insights, and your support for this last year. And most importantly, I appreciate your sense of humor as we work through a lot of tough issues for all of our students. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you very
your
much.
support.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you, but you haven't gone too far.
No, I'll be back.
And to anybody that's here this evening and to home watching, regardless of who is in this chair, we have a commitment that we work as a group for the children and for the students of York County to make this school division the best we can possibly make it. So, again, regardless as to who is sitting here. We now have a need to look at our organizational business with resolution number 2017-21, approving the county school board organizational business for calendar year 2017. Dr. Shannon, is there anything you want to add to this?
Just wanted to add one comment. I know the school board members have had the opportunity to review these documents, such as the board committee assignments, the organizational business calendar, policy manual review schedule, work sessions, and regular meetings. But if there's any questions or comments from the board relating to this time, we'll be happy to answer.
I have two questions. If you look at the dates, you have your calendar in front of you, and I only looked at this because I was trying to put everything into my calendar. The August 7th is the August 7th, 2017 meeting, work session. That's the first Monday, if I recall.
Okay.
And we don't have to settle on that, but it's something to come back and look at. And also October 16th. That's the third Monday. Didn't know what. So those 2 dates that we can look at, just to make sure we are.
August 7th and the
August the 7th and October the 16th.
Okay.
August the 7th is the first Monday. October 16th is a third Monday. And I know there are some dates that we change based on holidays, when schools are in and so forth. And those are my only two requests to take a look at for the
Okay.
year.
Staff will take a look at those and will submit or contact the board through either Friday notes or you and I can
Sounds good.
discuss.
Any other discussion of the organizational calendar for 2017? Not, is there a motion to approve?
Move approval of calendar. Are we approving everything together or separate? If we're doing it
Together.
Together.
Together,
so we-
both the business and the,
So we need to look at visit.
we need to look at the assignments.
Right.
Okay.
I printed it at home.
I have an extra copy here.
Yeah. Thank you. We have too many pieces of paper in front of you. I'm just going to run down this list of assignments, and we can talk about each if you would like to. WHRO is one of the organizations we participate with. Mrs. Kursky had indicated her desire to stay on WHRO.
She wanted to stay on WHR.
Okay.
The conversation is difficult for her. She had let me know it was difficult. Unless somebody else has heard differently. She said it was difficult for her to get there to those meetings. I know Mr. Richardson
Hers
said.
was foundation then.
Yeah,
Am I getting
yeah.
too confused?
So,
Okay,
but
okay.
Mr. Richardson said he would take WHRO if we needed him to. In his absence, we can place him there.
Yeah, he basically told me, when I knew he wasn't gonna be here, I'd try to just get as much information as I could, and that was one that he mentioned that he would enjoy doing, so.
So we'll put Mr. Richardson for WHRO.
And I don't mind staying as alternate.
Okay. New Horizons.
I'd like to stay there if I could.
Okay. Outstanding Youth Selection Committee. Now, I had not heard from Cindy on that one.
I haven't either.
Tell me what that entails. Is it a one time a year, or?
That's what I'm hearing. It's one time to look at applications that come through.
When I've done it in the past, I think you get a packet ahead of time to review the students that are
Right.
nominated.
Right.
And then you come to a meeting and there's a representative from the Board of Supervisors. Basically, the decisions are made of who the finalists are.
I mean, I'll be glad to take that unless Cindy wants to stay on there. I don't know. The only,
It's a daytime thing, I believe,
just one time a year.
pretty much.
Has she had any conversations with you, Barbara?
She had not, and the one that she requested was foundation.
Foundation,
So
yeah.
Right.
I'll put you down, Robbie, for that one, and if we need you both, we'll.
Okay.
I'll reverse it because, Robbie, you were the alternate on that one. So we'll just reverse that if need be.
And if Ms. Kershey feels like she'd like to serve there, we can swap that back. There's no problem.
Next, the Virginia School Boards Association. I have been there in the past and I can stay there.
we
Mark
usually-
as vice chair, you be back
I'm
up?
fine leaving it the way it is, if it's okay with you.
Okay, that's fine. School coordination team, Dr. James has been the one with Mark Shearhart. Has been, and we'll leave that.
Yes.
Health Advisory Committee, Dr. George?
I'd like to move off of that. Jimmy had mentioned maybe he would do that. I think we need someone that has some medical experience. I know he's an EMT. He'd mentioned that to me, so he does have some medical experience. But I didn't know if you were interested in that with your nursing.
Again,
background.
depends on looking at the schedule, and as we can both do it together, that means sometimes we both show up. It just will depend on when the meetings are held.
Well, they've got Albert down as the alternate. Is that the way we generally do that then?
I want to think he was probably the administration's representative
Yes.
to that meeting.
So you could have an alternate, you
Right.
and Jimmy, or Jimmy and you.
I'll put him down as a board member, and I'll go as the alternate. And if neither one of us can, we'll make sure somebody from administration is there.
I think someone there is there normally.
Yeah, he's-
Regardless.
Yes, Albert chairs that committee for the division.
Special Education Advisory Committee.
Yeah, I'll stay on
Stay
that
with
one.
that.
Yeah, it's just, I'll get there. It seems like every time there's a meeting, there's like 3 other things going on. But now backup, I don't know, if Cindy wants to continue being the backup or alternate, or whether anybody else wishes to.
And if you can't, we can leave Cindy here for now, and if you find that there's a conflict that you can't, just send out a signal to one of us, and we'll make sure we'll have somebody there.
Okay.
And I think with any of these positions, if the person can't go, we just need to know and see who can rearrange a schedule. Career and Technical Education Advisory Committee. We don't have a board representative there. You two,
Well,
first and
no.
second.
They
You're there.
got me under an alternate first and Robbie's alternate second. I'm not sure when are those meetings?
What does that entail, huh? Does anybody?
They're during the day.
Do we know which days of the week?
Not off the top of my head, I don't.
You know, they're quarterly or? do you-
Typically, I think they're quarterly.
If we can find out that schedule of times.
Maybe that'd be
See.
good too. Maybe a schedule of
Yeah.
all of them, so we kind of know where these things fall.
Sure.
That might be, because I don't know which ones are during the day, which ones are in the evenings.
Staff can put that together.
Thank you.
So we're gonna put a hold on that one. And the last foundation, the York Foundation for Public Education. And Cindy had indicated to remain there, Mark, you would stay
I'll
as
be
the
the
alternate.
alternate. All right. I think I covered one meeting for her.
Is there a need to just approve the dates and wait on the assignments?
I
Or
think
we can go ahead with where we are and we have to make changes later?
I'm okay with that.
So with that, I request a motion for the resolution 1701.
Yes, I'll move resolution 1701.
And I'll second.
Second, thank you. Mrs. Ford?
A motion was made by Mr. Medford and seconded by Dr. George to approve Resolution 1701. Dr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Medford,
Yes.
and Mrs. Haywood.
Yes, thank you.
Now, Madam Chair, I'd like to maybe table the next item until we have the full board.
Code of conduct.
Mhm.
We can definitely do that. The next item on the agenda was our code of conduct as it's stated from the Virginia School Boards Association. And that's something that all 5 of us need to be in place for and to sign. So we can table that till our next either work session in February. And with that, we move to presentations. Dr. Shander.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood. Our next work session is February 13th, so would you want to put that back on the agenda
Please.
for that day? Ms. Ford, can you make that note, please? Okay. Let me shut out this. All right, this evening we've got a few presentations to go through. So I'm going to ask, our first presentation this evening is A strategic plan update under Goal 3, compensation, and our Chief Finance Officer, Mr. Dennis Jarrett, is going to make that presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mrs. Haywood, congratulations on your
Thank you,
election.
thank you.
And board members, I want to take a few minutes here to go over with you one of your more important objectives that you have in your strategic plan dealing with licensed staff and their compensation. Now, who are licensed staff? We're talking about classroom teachers, guidance counselors, school media specialists, I think educational technology facilitators are in too. And there's a couple other groups as well. So you're talking about a large portion of your staff. Probably over 900 employees fall under the licensed staff compensation. Okay, specifically, Goal 3 talks about York County School Division will hire, recruit, retain, and support a diverse staff that meets our highest standards. Now, you have an objective under that particular goal, which states the compensation package for licensed staff will move in the top 3 of the Hampton Roads comparator market of 9 school divisions by July 1, 2017, and will remain there for the subsequent years. Now, those competitors, or those comparators, if we will, are excuse me, Hampton, Newport News, Williamsburg, James City County, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Suffolk, Chesapeake. I think that's Portsmouth, thank you, and Portsmouth. So those are the 8 that we use to compare to. And so all of the information you're going to see tonight is based on looking at those particular school divisions and comparing to York. Okay, you have set benchmarks in this particular objective of where you wanted to be since you adopted this goal, which goes back to FY13 when it was adopted. Now in FY14, you wanted to be ranked 5 or better, 15 ranked 4 or better, and 16 ranked 4 or better. We have already reported that information to you in previous years, and I'm pleased to say that through FY14 through FY16, you met your benchmark, you met your objective in those years, and so your county has, last year was in rank 4, where you are actually we were better than rank 4 in most situations. So where we go now for FY17 is you are raising the bar. It's not rank 4 now. Now we're going up to rank 3. So if you think about a high jump kind of a competition going on, the bar just got raised. And so I think that's important when we look at the information you're going to be, when we talk about the information we'll be looking at in a second. I just want to remind you that that the VRS shift, and just a little bit of background information, back in fiscal year 13, the General Assembly required all public agencies in Virginia to shift 5% of the VRS, the retirement cost, if you will, to the employees. Okay, you could do that over a period of years, but by FY18, you had to have it completed. Well, in FY17, all the school divisions in this region had finished that. So last year when we talked about this, everybody was on board with the full shift, and that's the case again this year as well. So why that's important is it makes the comparison of the data much simpler, because in previous years what we had to do was adjust our comparator scales to reflect where they were on the VRS shift over. So we don't have to do that anymore, and so that makes this comparison much cleaner. Now, this is what I wanted to do was first give you a sense of what if you hadn't raised the bar? What if you hadn't raised it up to rank 3 and you kept it at rank 4? What would it look like? Now, if you look at this chart, you'll see over on the left-hand side, you'll see pay lane. Okay, those are the 4 pay lanes that are in our license pay plan. You've got the bachelor's lane, the master's plus 30, and the doctorate. Each one of those lanes starts at step 0 and goes to step 30. So it's a total of 31 steps. So what we do when we compare the pay scales with other school divisions is we look at those steps relative to York County, and that's how we determine whether or not we are in what rank we are in. Now, I'd also want to point out, though, if you look at the staffing on those particular pay scales, On the bachelor's scale, we have 364 staff members. That's about 40% of the group of folks that are on the licensed pay plan. On the MA pay lane, we have 476 staff members. That's 52%. So that's your largest group. Your master's pay lane is where most of your licensed staff are. Then on the master's plus 30, you have 66 staff members, or 7%. And on the doctorate, you have 10 staff members, or 1%. So you've got a total of 916 staff members on this pay plan. Now, so what we do is we look at each one of those steps. So I've got the comparison up there for 15, 16. That's what we looked at in previous years. So if you look at the number of steps, let's look at fiscal year 15 first. This one right here. If you see that there were 23 steps on the bachelor's pay lane that were in rank 4 or better. So that's 74% of your steps. So as you look at all of those, and I don't want to go through all of 15 and 16, but you can see you progressively got better in 15 and 16. You increased the number of steps in both the bachelor's and the master's, which was good, and that was a part of your objective. Now, when we move into FY17, you'll see that on the bachelor's pay lane, if we were in rank 4 again, not rank 3, we would have 97% of our steps in rank 4 or better. Okay, on the master's pay plan, we'd have 27 steps. So you can see we would have been very competitive if we were still on the rank 4 or better. And that's good news. And if you look at the number of staff, which is the columns to the right, another way of looking at that is, okay, you've got the number of steps. Now, how many people are on each one of those steps? And how do they fall in the ranking? Well, if you look at FY17 using rank 4, you'll see that we have very high marks. 98% of the bachelor's staff, or staff with a bachelor's degree, are in a rank 4 or better. 70% of the masters, so we dropped down. We dropped down in the masters. We have lost a little bit of ground there if we were comparing on rank 4. And then, of course, we stay on the master's plus 30 and the doctorate at 100%. So this is what it would look like if you hadn't adjusted the scale or adjusted the ranks. Now, this is what it looks like if we use the rank 3, which is a part of your benchmark that you're wanting to meet this fiscal year. So fiscal years 15 and 16 stay the same, but now we're looking at a rank 3 or better for the number of steps in FY17. Now, you can see that for the bachelor's pay lane, you've got 20 steps. Okay, it's a pretty significant degradation there. It was 31% in FY16. So you've lost a little bit of your competitiveness in the bachelor's pay lane as far as the pay scale goes. So you have 65% of those steps in rank 3 or better. On the master's pay lane, you've got 27 steps, or 87%, which is very competitive. And then, of course, you keep 100% on the master's plus 30 and the doctorate. So on the step comparison, you look pretty good. But however, the bachelor's pay lane is starting to fall behind. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that and work towards improving that.
We just
Lost connection. Yes. Thing is off. Well, I can continue to talk through this if that's okay. Okay. So if you'll look at you don't have a handout on this.
They have it on there.
Oh, okay, you have it. Okay, very good. Okay, if you look over to the number of staff members that are on the rank 3 or better, you'll see that we do better there than when you're looking at just the number of steps. Now, why is that? That's because what you have is you have more staff on steps that are more competitive than are least competitive. So if you look at the bachelor's pay lane, 75% of our staff are on a step that is ranked 3 or better. Okay, so that's an improvement over the number of steps, but it is, again,
It's gonna be one of those nights, Dennis.
okay, but it is, again, better than what we were looking at for the number of steps. Okay, but now the question I think we have to ask ourselves is 75%, does that meet your objective for this particular goal. Now, my feeling is that it does. Now, it would be nice if it were 100% or higher up, but it's not. And so I think from all intents and purposes, we can say we meet the objective. However, the bigger concern is we're starting to see a slide now. Okay, and we've got to be careful about that. We've got to watch this, and we've got to make sure our pay plan remains competitive. Now, if you look at the masters, you'll see it's at 70% of number of staff on a competitive pay scale. Now, these numbers of staff can change as people start moving through the scale too. So you got to remember, as people move into least competitive steps, you're going to see these percentages change as well. Of course, the master's and 30 doctorate remains competitive against the folks that we compare to. Excuse me. Any questions about this before we move on?
I'm going to ask a difficult question that I don't know if you have the answer to. This is good. This is good. I mean, obviously, we see the work of staying, focused on compensation when it comes to licensed staff. We've been able to do some great things here. This is something that we can go to a recruiting fair for our region and really be able to pull some great people in to become teachers in York County. What about our non-licensed folks? Okay, all the folks that I assume that are people at school board office, our principals, our bus drivers, our custodians, our maintenance, the other side of our house. I know our goal, our objective was to focus on license, so I don't want to get to the weeds here and start a really lengthy conversation, but I'd love to find out at some point where that group of employees find themselves in the comparative market.
Yeah.
Because that way, for me, I can say, okay, our resources have done well here. We have to monitor and keep a finger on it, but if the other side of our house is in good shape too, then fine. That means we're moving both groups into that, in that market of being competitive. But I don't know what the other side of the house looks like.
Well, just real quickly, I will say for the non-licensed staff, the way the process works, and it's worked for years, is that every 4 years every year there's a review that's done, and different employee groups are reviewed over a 4-year period. It's called a quadrennial review. So every 4 years, every employee group in the non-licensed area gets reviewed. Now, 4 years is a long time.
It is.
And so there is the concern that do we stay up to date in a 4-year cycle? One might argue we do not, but that's the way the plan is working.
What is our target when we do those reviews? Are we targeting the middle of the road? Are we targeting 4 or better in our comparative marketplace? Do we use the same criteria we're using here?
You do not. You use more of a middle of the road standard with this. You're not looking to be in the top third for that group. And that really goes back to some practices that the school division has had for many years that also dovetail with what the county was doing.
So we as a board would have to revisit how we look at, because I know that, yes, licensed teachers in the classroom, boots on the ground, that's our primary focus, but everything that wraps around it is just as important in my mind. So for apples to apples, I would love to explore that somewhere along the way, because we did some great things here. And we poured a lot of sweat and tears into getting us to this point. What can we do on this other side to make, because non-licensed include principals, I assume, assistant
That's
principals.
correct.
It's the leadership
Nurses.
along with the support staff.
That's right.
So it's two in squeeze.
Well, you've got your strategic plan that's up that you're looking at now, and that would be
Right.
a great time to take a look
I
at
think
that.
that needs to
Yes.
be
We may
begun.
very well need to have a work session on that strategic plan that sets for another few years. I think my concern, and Dennis, I don't know if I can restate what you just said. We've done a lot of good work,
Yes, you
but
have.
we're slipping.
Yes.
I don't care to slip
Yeah.
and find us in a position to try to climb out. So what do we as a board do so that we won't slip anymore? We can grab where we are and build up.
Yeah. I think 2 points. First point I think you made is very accurate. You've come a long way with this pay plan. You sit back and take credit for where you've brought this, because you are in a very competitive position. We don't want to lose that, and there's only one way to keep that from happening, and that is you've got to continue your focus on this pay plan. Now, I do want to point out that when we're talking about the pay plan, we're not talking about lost steps. Okay, as you know, we have an internal equity issue going on in the division where we have 4 steps that have not been restored. This has nothing to do with this. This is not looking at steps at all. And so you've got that internal equity concern, and then you've also got the concern that you're speaking of, which is we don't want this to recede back to the point to where we're trying to dig back out of a ranked 5 position and move forward. And that's got to be done on an annual basis. That's the only way to do it. Now, you're in a car race, if I can use that example. You're in a car race, and the other 9 drivers are those other 8 school divisions are the other 9 drivers. And so you've got to make sure you stay out ahead of them if you want to be in the top third. And so that's the challenge of the board, is to kind of make sure that we know what we got our finger on the pulse of what other folks are doing, and so that we can retain our position in this. And that can be a challenge in and of itself, because, you know, when you give a step to staff, that does nothing to improve the scale, nothing at all. So you've kind of got a double edge, or you've got a double program going on. First is we want to retain our step program, and the second thing is we want to keep our scales competitive. So you've got a dual compensation program going on, and it's a challenge. But I will tell you from my perspective, and I suspect from Dr. Shandor's as well, you guys have made compensation your priority. I mean, you've done that, and you've made it clear to staff as well that you want that teacher pay plan to be competitive. So we're going to do everything we can do to bring you packages that do that.
But to address what you just said, and to go back to Mark's concern, the non-licensed, and as we move into budget time,
Yes.
we've got to have some serious discussion about what do we do as we put this budget together. So just keep in mind that we'll probably have to have another get-together
Yes.
to look at this.
One last thing, I just popped in my head, because I know that Virginia Beach, are they still a division that really sets, they're still way out there ahead of everybody else in the pack when it comes to compensation and license?
Well, I would say
Or
in
they
general,
kind of
the
close?
south side is. In
So-
general, the south side is. It's shifted over the years as to who is the most competitive over there. At one point, it actually used to be Portsmouth of all places, but that's no longer the case.
So they're not so far
Yeah.
out that it skews the whole?
No.
Okay, good, okay.
Now, there are some spots, when we look at these steps, the bachelor's and 65% of the steps that are competitive and the 35 that's not. The 35 that's not is primarily located at the beginning of the pay plan. So at the beginning of the pay lane, if you will. So we know where the competitiveness is and where it's not. And so, but it's difficult to go in and make changes to that plan without affecting the whole thing. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And again, I please take comfort in knowing you've done a tremendous job in getting this license pay plan where it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
In looking at time, we've had this has been a packed meeting night, and we do have our next meeting at 7. Dr. Shannon, we need to look at how can we rearrange some of the items on here
Yeah,
and handle the most pressing.
Yeah, given the condensed time frame, I'm going to ask the board if we could move the strategic plan update objective under Goal 5, customer service surveys, easy for me to say. If we can move that presentation to the February 13th work session. And also under discussion, if we could move the discussion related to the tobacco use policy, if we can move that to the February 13th work session. I'd really like to get in item C, presentations expected budget, FY18 budget, and then we need to discuss the workers' compensation reserve fund, and then finish with the request for proposal update from Dr. James.
Dr. George, you're okay?
Yes.
Lauren? So yes, you have consensus for that. So now we'll look at C, the FY17 expected budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Haywood. All right, I'll let Dennis get his.
Okay, all right, well, this won't take but a minute because this is a fairly routine item that you see every year at this time. And what we're doing is we're just going in and bringing forward some adjustments to the current year budget. And the adjustments on the revenue side are very, very straightforward. It's an adjustment of $77,000, and that relates to Title 6B, one of our federal grants. So that's a little bit of an increase there. Then on the expenditure side, you have a number of changes in different categories, and I'll try to encapsulate those changes for you in a couple of bullets. First one is where staff are placed. When we develop the budget, it's a program budget. So we put staff in like kindergarten program, first grade program, second grade program, and so on. And so when we actually hire those staff, they may get hired as a kindergarten teacher as opposed to a second grade teacher, or placed in the kindergarten area instead of the second grade. So when we do that, we have to move the money around to follow that FTE. And so you'll see changes related to that. You'll also see changes related to what health insurance coverages people elected. For example, if an employee went from a family plan to an employee-only plan in a given year, we have to move money around for that as well. And those are primarily the changes that take place with this, in addition to adding in the $77,000 to the grant. So this item requires no action by the school board at this time. You will be looking at this when you approve your March, in your March regular meeting, when you approve the FY18 superintendent proposed budget. This will be a part of that. So at that time also, you'll see all the line item detail that goes behind all of these categorical expenditures. So any questions on this one? Okay, very good.
Thank you. I will now move to the FY18 budget.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Haywood. Board members, Dennis and I are going to sort of tag team a presentation on a preliminary view of the FY18 budget. I'm going to turn it over to him for the first slide, which is revenue outlook. We'll take a second to pull that up.
Yeah. Let me see if I can make that a little bit better. Okay. Again, very briefly, we haven't had an opportunity to brief you yet on what the governor's proposed budget looked like. That was released back in mid-December. So if you will, let's go through a couple of these. I won't go through all of the line items, but I want to point out a couple of them. First one, if you look at basic aid, based on the governor's proposal, it's going down by $370,000. This is based on, this is comparing to this year's budget projections. Okay, now, the reason that's going down, it's not because of a policy change or anything like that. It has to do with really primarily the number of students. Because if you look at the top, the projection for students is going down by 50. So as those students go down, our state revenue goes down. So if you look at the basic aid line item, and then you look at a series of line items right there and right here, all of those relate to the number of students going down. So it's not as a result of any policy changes. Now, one thing about this, and I'm really pleased to see, is the supplemental lottery line item. If you look at that, it's gone from $403,000 to $1.7 million. Now, some of you, Mrs. Haywood, Mr. Medford, you may remember there was a number of years ago, this was prior to 2009, when the recession hit, we used to get our lottery money in a lump sum amount, and it wasn't restricted as to how we could use it. Well, oddly enough, the state is moving back in that direction. So that $1.7 million are funds that aren't earmarked for anything other than school expenditures.
They put it in a different category.
They did. They changed, and that's a positive thing for us, because in the past, they were taking a big chunk of that and they would put it into incentive programs and other categorical appropriations. So that's the good news. Now, another thing that's not as good, though, is if you look at the employer shared benefits line item, and I've got a note too, and I want to take you to that in a second, but you'll see that the revenue is going up $434,000. That looks good, but it's not as good as it looks. Now, the reason for that is because that's the state share, that increase is the state share of the increase that they are mandating for the Virginia retirement system. Now, what are those increases? If you look, you'll see that what we have here is the rates are going up for the professional group. The professional group is primarily everyone except for custodians, bus drivers, and food service workers, now, and maintenance workers. So if you look at the governor's proposed for FY18, the increase in the rate is 1.66 percentage points, and on the retiree health care credit, it's 0.12. That that totals to 1.78. That drives a total expenditure to the school division of $1.3 million. So if you think about that 434 in relation to the cost of 1.3, you can see it's hardly keeping up with the mandate that we have to meet related to that cost increase. So that's something that's going to probably, well, not probably, it will eat at the resources that you have available with those additional funds for the lottery. One other item I wanted to point out to you is the compensation supplement. Now, you know that $502,000 is going to go away in FY17, okay? But in FY18, what the governor has proposed is a 1.5% bonus for all SOQ staff, that's licensed and non-licensed. That's not as good as a 2% salary bump. If they continue with that line item would have been $800,000 for FY18. But I do want to point out to you one little nuance, and this happened a few years back, but the bill that came out with this in it did not specify that these dollars could be used for an across-the-board payment to staff. In other words, you can't increase your pay scale and meet this requirement necessarily. They're not interpreting it that way yet. Now, in talking to the budget director at the state, he's indicated to me that the State Department of Education is working close with the House and the Senate to get the language put in there that, for example, if you decide to do a step next year, that step would count towards that bonus payment, so you wouldn't have to do both. So we'll be watching that, and I don't really think that's going to be an issue because it wasn't in years past, so I'm optimistic they'll change that, but we're going to keep an eye out on it anyway. So if you look at the revenue, you've got $1.9 million total increase in state revenue. You've got a mandated cost increase for Virginia Retirement System, $1.3 million. So you really only have $631,000 of new resources to work with there. Keep going. Okay. This next part we're going to look at is we want to take I guess you might say, another look at some preliminary data related to the FY18 budget. If you recall, back in December at the work session, I presented some information to you at that time. Well, we've got more information now, and so we want to provide that to you, and I will tell you now that we're going to have even more information in the next couple of weeks related to this. But if you Okay, on the revenue side, again, here's the $1.9 million we just talked about that was proposed by the governor. Then we have federal revenue. Impact aid, we've talked about that extensively. I really don't know what the budget for impact aid next year because, number one, they don't have an FY17 budget approved. They haven't even started working on an FY18. I will tell you what the plan is, though. The plan is, unless something changes in the next few weeks, because we're going to have to come forward with a superintendent proposed budget, is to just level fund that and just monitor it and keep you apprised of any changes that take place. So I would expect that's probably what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. We'll just level fund impact aid and just monitor it in the weeks ahead. The Department of Defense expected to go up $95,000. And then the Revenue Stabilization Fund transfer to the schools that was used to offset the reduction in impact aid from this year would go down by $300,000, giving us a net resource available of $1.7 million.
All right, thank you, Dennis. So now we move on to the major operating expenditure increases. This is a list of our mandated costs for FY18. As you can see, and Dennis talked about a little bit, the VRS 1.7 increase will cost us $1.3 million. The next one for non-professional rate increase, we don't have a figure on that rate at this point. Moving down through the slide, I'm sorry, my slide is going back and forth on my computer. The next slide, looking at special education. Our special education population continues to rise as well as the needs of our students. So you can see we're looking at adding 3 FTEs for teachers and 4 paraeducators for special education. You can see those amounts on the right. Next, limited English proficiency, our LEP teachers. These numbers also continue to rise. This is also, board members, if you'll recall, moving from that change from moving from tutors to teachers for LEP. You can see we're looking at 3 FTEs under LEP. Under Child Services Act, we see an increase there of about $213,000, and this is due to the numbers of students placed outside the division for services. And as you know, for CSA, it's difficult to plan for those situations. And then McKinney-Vento Act, transportation, which is our homeless students. You can see that we're going to increase there about $25,000. So you're looking at a total mandated increase of a little over $1.9 million.
And that piece, that I think that's important there, that word mandated, that's gotta come.
Yes. So looking at this next slide, major operating expenditures, this is under compensation. So if we're looking at an average of 2% step for all eligible staff, you can see that amount is about a little over $1.3 million. It's important to note that these increases are averages. So you can see the licensed staff would be 1.5%, non-licensed would be 2%, and then we would do that market adjustment for the licensed staff of a 0.5% increase, which would cost us $250,000. And then we've also had some discussion around the table about that quadrennial review process for non-licensed staff members, and you can see that amount is about $42,500. So for total compensation increase, we're looking at a little over $1.6 million. So I've talked to you about mandated costs, and I've talked a little bit about the compensation increase for looking at next year. There's also a number of additional factors, as you can see on the slide: health insurance, contractual services, shared services with the county, attrition, and other savings. We're going to continue, our team, along with Mr. Jarrett, we're going to continue to evaluate and assess these areas and report back to the board at our next work session with information related to these areas. And this next slide is sort of lays it all out there, sort of a summary of everything I've just mentioned. You can see the total revenue increase that Dennis shared is over $1.7 million. The mandated expenditure increases are 1.9. Compensation expenditure increases 1.6. So the funding gap before the county administrator preliminary increase is at $1.8 million. And then I've had a lot of conversations with Mr. Help me out,
Morgan.
Mr. Morgan. How I would forget his name. Had a lot of conversations with Mr. Morgan related to this, and this is not a firm number at this point. He wanted me to make sure that I communicated that, but that's kind of where we're sitting right now. So after the increase from the county administrator, we're looking at a gap of about $1.3 million right now. So as you can see, we have some significant challenges ahead of us, but we're going to continue to work and bring back more information for the next board work session.
Thank you very much.
Any questions or comments?
And that's even before any kind of having to hit the reset button on anything we've cut over the years or anything.
It's gonna be an interesting budget time, needless to say. Because this is truly saying with what we have in place, we will be cutting 1.3 in some fashion.
And then, that 1.3 for the VRS is really challenging school divisions across the state. Dennis and I have attended several sessions and conferences through VAS, and they're certainly advocating and pushing for folks to reconsider that dollar or that percentage of 1.78. It was really tough for districts to swallow.
Well, what happened was the state accelerated the process to fully fund VRS, and they accelerated it by a year. And they could actually push that back, but the general consensus that we're getting is there's not a whole lot of appetite for doing that, so we're not holding our breath for that.
If no further discussion on this presentation, we're going to move down to the section on discussion. I think Dr. Shander, we're looking at workers' compensation.
We are. I think we can probably do request for proposals update and then the workman's comp. I think we'll be able to get through that. So we'll let Dennis Jarrett take a swig of water and we'll take a little break. And we'll let Carl. Yes, so Carl, Dr. James is going to go through request for proposals update. There's a number of items he's going to discuss.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Congratulations, Ms. Haywood. And members of the board, I'm going to share some information with you tonight about requests for proposals. You know, we have two we're working on, and we updated the board on this in December, so I'll bring you an additional update of where we are now with each of those. The first one is balancing elementary attendance zones and bus routing efficiency. You also may recall back in December, we talked about two phases of that particular RFP, to work on that RFP. We're into the first phase now of balancing elementary attendance zones. I can also remind you that this RFP was initially issued in July. There were no respondents, and we did have a targeted solicitation, and we got some responses to that. So in October, then we were able to hire a consultant after things were submitted in September. So with that, I've sent multiple data files to the consultant. My staff has, as along with county staff, because they need to look at not only our data in our student information system, but well as the geographic profile of the county. So, you know, she's done that, and she's developed 3 options. Also in December and also in early January, we started to review those options. A team of operations staff, along with Dr. Guy, began to look at some of those options. And from those options, we made some recommendations to make sure her options met the requirements of the RFP. So with that in mind, we have asked her to go back and refine some of her recommendations. And tomorrow we have another WebEx, which is actually, she has all of the maps online, and she can manipulate the maps as well as we can to look at the particular areas that we need to focus on to see how well that meets the requirements of the RFP, or what I know the board would prefer that we do as far as attendance zones. With that, it's interesting to watch that happen, because whenever we take a community or a street or any neighborhood and we place it in school A and remove it from school B, it automatically tells me the number of students I will now have in that school, which is very interesting to watch that part unfold as we go back and look at all the adjustment that we could possibly make. So our work tomorrow is to further look at option, or plan A, she calls it, to make sure that's the one we've been working on, and then begin to look at plan B and plan C. And once we finish that review, then of course there'll be another review by staff, more staff than reviewed it the first time, before we have presentations to the board and also to the community. So if I talk about next steps from that, it would be once that part's finished and we have 3 options that we bring to the board and the board approves it, the option that the board feels best represent what we want to bring to our community and how we shape our attendance zones, once that's approved, then the next part is begin to look at the bus routing efficiency. She has begun work on the secondary portion of that, because it's not the intent of this proposal to change the secondary attendance zones. But once she finishes that and the board approves attendance zones, then we will begin to look at the bus routes for elementary schools based on the new zones. And that's important for 2 reasons. As she started to work on the bus routes on all of the attendance zones, for me and for her, it was a better idea to have the new zones for us to look at bus routing efficiency, because the end goal is going to be is see how effective, efficient our bus routes are, and see if there's any time that can be saved from our bus routes. And then that will lead us into the discussion of some cost-neutral alternatives for changing school start times. Because as we all know, transportation is a key portion of what we can do when we look at school start times. So is there any question there about what we're doing with those RFPs?
As you do your attendance zone, are you taking into consideration the developments that started building out and then stopped, and have any kicked in? But those divisions, those subdivisions throughout the county would have to come into play with this attendance zone work?
Yes, ma'am. I sent her the initial information I shared with the board back in the spring, and just in my conversation today, she wanted me to update her with where we are with those developments, which ones are moving forward, which ones are not, and trying to gauge a timeline of what the developer says he hopes to have it complete, because that will help her to make a more informed decision about the size of each of our elementary schools. That's a very important component.
And just right off the top of your head, I'm curious, which ones, did any of them that we looked at last year pick up and start the building out again?
Well, I can tell you that, let's start on the upper end of the county. In the reserve, all the single-family homes are complete. They've begun to work on the condominiums. I think in talking to Mr. Shearhart today, they have 2 complete and families have moved into, but I can tell you have quite a number that still need to be built, and they're working on that one. Next comes to Whitaker's Mill. If you ever ride by that one, is located on Penniman Road. When I was by there a week or so ago, they had started to work on the clubhouse. So from the clubhouse, they'll start to build condominiums. So that one, I could say, perhaps a year from now, they'll have a lot of those condominiums complete before they start to work on the single-family homes. In the Marquee, the only thing that's happening in the Marquee right now, they have harvested some of the trees. If you are riding down 64 and you know where the property is, you look to your right, if you're going west, you'll see some trees have been harvested. And that's on the housing portion of the Marquee. And that's all that's happened there. Because before you really start construction, he's built a temporary bridge across the creek, but he happens to need a more substantial bridge before you start construction. But I can tell you, the developer has talked to me recently, has also talked to county staff about where we are with certain things relative to that property. So we'll begin to look at that one in more detail. If I come down to this end of the county, we know Yorktown Arts, we talked about last year for Yorktown Elementary, where we had quite a number of students, more than was expected from the projections. That was complete last year. You can see Nelson's Grant that's located to the right of Food Lion, to the left of Food Lion, where Subway and a number of restaurants are. They are really began to complete that one. But I can also tell you, we don't have that many students coming from that one. The Crescent that we moved from the Yorktown zone to the Seaford zone, you know, basically they put in some of the infrastructure for sewer and water and all of that, but they've not started to construct any buildings. I think in Osborne Landing, that's in the Seaford zone on Seaford Road. The last time I was there, they had started construction on one house. I don't know if they moved past that. I'll look at Doug because he passed every day. No, they still only have one house constructed there. The next one I'll talk about, moving down 17, I'll talk about the townhomes at Martin's Farm. They've put in the infrastructure, they put in the initial pavement on the road, so I expect to see those townhomes start to come out of the ground, so to speak, within the next month or so, all depending on weather. The last one I'll talk to you about is going to be Commonwealth Green. They've completed all of the apartments. We've not gotten the number of students from Commonwealth Green as we had anticipated. I think the projection was 75. I talked to the Grafton Bethel staff as well as transportation today, and we have about 27 students from Commonwealth Green from the 75. I also know in the fall, the developer of Commonwealth Green asked the county to delay part of that project. The expectation was a timeline, a deadline, I may say, to have a road constructed from Commonwealth Green to Route 17 to delay that. And so they have not started to build any structures there as of yet. So that's kind of an update. So since you're talking about developments, I'll just skip to another part of this. If we're talking about new developments, and talking to Tim Cross from the county over the last month or so, there are still 2 new developments that are now coming before the Planning Commission. And Ms. Haywood, you'd be very interested in 2 of these.
They're in my area, right?
They're in your area. One is the apartments at Lightfoot, which is going to be at the intersection of Old Lightfoot Road, Old Moortown Road and Lightfoot Road. It used to be almost an entrance to the Pottery before on that one. And there's another development, nothing has been submitted to the Planning Commission, that may be on Boulevard around the area of the hospital.
Right, okay.
Right, and then I'll come back to the Lower County in the Tab area, the Smith Farm subdivision. They're on Yorktown Road between Mount Vernon Elementary School or Plantation Acres, the development that's right there when you go up Mount Vernon Drive, and Taylor Farms. They put in some homes right there. So there are more developments on the way. And when I talked to the consultant today, I'm going to share the information with her with some proposed timelines as to when those developments should be complete. So we have a lot of things happening out there. And I guess the trick here is going to be how we use all that information to develop effective attendance zones.
I just had a quick question. Thank you for the update, because I don't know how you keep all that. You didn't even use
Yeah,
your
it's a
notes.
lot of information.
Carl's next job somewhere along the way, long time from now, he'll be in charge of something, doing like, reference to timeline from Magruder and Yorktown. All right, are we looking at trying to accomplish something for the 17-18 school year?
Well, that's a difficult thing. That was the hope in the very beginning, when we initially put out the RFP. But given where we are now, we think we need to give it the appropriate amount of time to have board members ask the appropriate questions, get feedback from the community before we actually decide on what that timeline is going to be. I hate to say that, but this is where we are now. We did not get off to the start that we wanted to get off to. But in that, I'm constantly looking at enrollment and projections and spaces at Yorktown and at Magruder, and also at Grafton Bethel, because all of those ones are going to be most heavily impacted with those new developments if they come in at the levels the enrollment was projected.
Well, I asked that question because I know we're moving into January here. We'll be February next time we get together. At some point, we may have it looking doable, but the part about where you said we have to have time to communicate to the community and to others involved how this impact will play itself out. We can't roll it in May and say, oh, by the way, this is what we're. So that's why I asked that question on purpose, because yes, those two schools need some relief. We know that. I think Magruder was at 670 or something, 680 or something. I heard a number. They're feeling the same pain as Yorktown. So I just didn't know how that was going to play itself out. But I think the quicker we get a timeline down on paper and out to everybody, the better, even if it's a preliminary timeline.
You're absolutely right.
Because some people may be thinking we're trying to do something now versus later, and so we can just clear it all up and just say, okay, this is what we anticipate happening and when and how.
Charles, do you have the Taylor Farms project? Do you know when the next meeting is? I know that I went to the first meeting that they had, Board of Supervisors, and the developer was there. I've had a couple of people call me and ask me questions about it, and I really don't know that much about when the next meeting is.
Going to the Planning Commission on February 8th.
So the Planning Commission on February 8th.
Correct.
Yes.
That's the next step. Okay. And if they approve it, goes to Board of Supervisors.
Yes.
They approve it at that point, then we know it's going to happen, and we really need to kind of get some real good idea as to how that's going to impact District 5 down there for sure, and potentially District 4.
You're absolutely right.
Maybe, they have it a month apart, so next month, February would be Planning Commission, I think maybe March, Board of Supervisors.
Yes.
So maybe at our April work session or something, we can maybe have some good information on that and find out what direction that's going, if it's going to even happen. So that would be great. Thank you, Carl.
Sure.
Did you want to do the last one? Wrapping up the RFP?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was asleep on that.
I didn't say that.
Pardon the pun, but we were talking about the sleep study or the adolescent sleep patterns. As you may remember, in November, we had a community forum at York High School where two consultants gave information about adolescent sleep patterns. And from that, there were a number of questions from the audience as well as comments. And the consultant is going to go back and develop materials that will also be posted on our website based on the question and feedback from that community. I can also tell you that the consultant, perhaps this week or next week, may call you. I think he called you sometime in the fall to get some feedback, to get additional feedback from board members. And when he does that, then he can complete this RFP, to work on this RFP, and give us additional materials to be posted on our website, as well as provide recommendations for us moving forward with how we need to best address adolescent sleep patterns or adolescents in their sleep within the school division. So he says to me it will be complete this month, which means next week it should be done.
Okay.
Just today, we posted additional materials on the website. If you haven't been there, there's some very neat things that they have put there in sort of a way that a teenager at home can look at their sleep patterns and actually look at, well, am I really getting enough sleep? How can I better prepare myself for what I need to do each day by the amount of sleep I get? So it's a very important checklist. I would advise everyone to take a look at those if you want more information about sleep.
Thank you, a lot of good information. And the last discussion, Dr. Shander, is the Workers' Compensation Reserve Fund.
Yes, Dennis is going to provide a brief update on the Workman's Compensation Reserve Fund.
Yeah, just as a refresher, the workers' compensation fund that the school division operates is we are self-insured on workers' comp. So you have a fund, a reserve fund, to cover any claims that would occur during the year. Okay, that fund right now is about $3.8 million. Well, as of June 30, it was $3.8 million. We've done some work with our insurance provider, if you will. We call them a third-party administrator because effectively all they do is administer claims for us. And I'm trying to look at that sweet spot, if you will, for where we would like that fund to be. And what we did was we worked up some confidence levels as, okay, like for example, the lowest we would look at would be 60%. And what that means is we're 60% sure that we have enough of the funds we have enough funds in the reserve fund to cover our claims. Okay, that's too low for us, but that's one of the factors that we use. So then we went through a range all the way up to 95% confidence level. If you look at the 95% confidence level, then that's where we are right now, $3.8 million. We think that's probably a little bit high. We can probably ratchet that down a little bit. So what we're really thinking about is maybe an 80 to 85% confidence level. If we do that, we can lower the reserve fund to about $3 million. So what we would be asking the board to do later tonight at your regular meeting is to approve a resolution that would move $800,000 out of the Workers' Comp Reserve Fund and move it over to the Capital Projects Fund, the school division's Capital Projects Fund. Now, what we would propose to use those funds are $600,000 to buy buses. That'll buy between 5 and 6 buses, depending on what type of bus we get. And then $200,000 for textbooks, and instruction has identified some AP adoptions that need to take place that we would use the $200,000 for. Now, you are just one step in the approval process. Okay, if you do approve this later tonight, then that resolution gets forwarded to the Board of Supervisors. Since they also have a vested interest in this fund, they then would have to approve that. We've had some conversations with county staff, and we feel like that they are on board with us on this. So it's an attempt also to try to make a stab at some of the bus replacements that we have not been able to do in recent years. It's not going to plug the hole completely, but it's certainly going to help, and the same thing with textbooks.
Dennis, I'm curious, those conversations with the Board of Supervisors are not conversations with Mr. Rossmer specifically. We were talking about he was talking more about trying to equalize this and make those funds, workman's comp funds, equal. My thought at the time was, it's like apples and oranges. I think the county and the school.
The county's fund?
Yeah.
Well, that would be very difficult to do.
I'm just curious as to how that came. We didn't use that as a factor.
Oh, no,
That
no,
was
that
not a
doesn't,
parameter that we.
I worked with our insurance provider, our third-party administrator, and they used industry standards to come up with this. Let me give you an example of how important this reserve is. We are self-insured for up to $500,000 per claim. So what that means, if we had a workers' comp claim for one person, we are responsible for up to $500,000 of that. Now, we do have excess catastrophic insurance that covers for anything over $500,000 for that one claim. But in a worst-case scenario, you could have several claims in a year that go over $500,000. If you do, we're responsible for that first $500,000 for each one of those. And so we have twice as many employees as they do. We have a higher threshold. They use, I think, a lower threshold than $500,000 for their stop loss. So there's other factors that come into play, but we did not look at their expected liabilities when we.
I think the important thing is we both evaluated our funds and tried to do what's most prudent.
Yes, exactly. And we'll keep looking at this fund too, because we budget right now about $350,000 a year for workers' comp claims. And that's pretty much what our claims have been. So we've been running pretty pretty level with our budget amount to our claims. So if that continues to happen, you know, what we would do is look at any interest that's accrued in this fund and might come back and ask for another appropriation out of that. So we'll continue to monitor.
Anything else? All righty, this brings us to the end of our work session, special meeting. Anything else, Dr. Shannon?
Just a reminder that we are going to move the strategic plan update under Goal 5, customer service surveys, and the tobacco use policy to the next work session. So Dr. Carroll and Mr. Mead will see you in February for that presentation.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we're going to adjourn this meeting, and then we'll reopen for our regular meeting at 7.
Meeting adjourned.